Hi, everyone. I do hope you can hear me. Let us first talk about the business of how we'll proceed. If you don't mind, please mute your computer, your sounds, so that actually we could start and there would be no disturbances. And later on, we will enter into the question answer session. So thanks a lot for making to this teaser lecture. I hope you will find it useful and interesting. The way we will proceed, we will provide you with some sort of teaser ideas. Benjamin will be the one who will start. Then we'll have Linas and then myself. So let us do this in sort of two stage thing. That is, we first start with the lectures, sort of short ideas, and then we'll jump into the questions about what you heard. And the last thing will be questions about the program in general. So if Ben is ready, why not sharing the screen and get us started?
Okay, thank you, Povilas. I'm Benjamin. I'm just going to upload my slides now, so hopefully it won't take too long. Okay, so hopefully you can all see my slides. So I took the theme of this session, which is big data for big questions. And I thought I'd talk about big data in a pandemic. Okay, so we're currently facing this big pandemic in the world. Okay, and it's important for both policymakers and also financial investors and essentially everyone to try and understand in real time the economic impact of COVID-19. Okay, so one of the issues that everyone faces here is that national statistics are produced relatively infrequently. So, for example, GDP is normally produced quarterly at most, and there's often quite a big lag in terms of producing this data. So the data has to be collected and analyzed, and you often get it 1 or 2 months after the fact. And in terms of the current pandemic, we have now Q1 GDP data for lots of countries. Okay, but that includes January and February, where there was probably some impact of the pandemic, but not a big one. Okay, so one solution, which I'm going to do in a very simple way today, is to use some high frequency data. Okay, so data that's available both in a more timely manner and also has a higher frequency than just quarterly data. Okay, so the idea here is I'm going to take hourly data on electricity consumption in Lithuania, okay, and I'm going to use this and see how we can gauge some idea of the impact of the pandemic on economic activity using this electricity consumption data. Okay, and this is something you can all do. I put these graphs together in Excel. There may be a possibility for me to share the Excel files afterwards. We can see, but this is the source is in the bottom left. It's from liquid.eu. You can actually get finer data than this, than just hourly if you chose a shorter time horizon than 1 month. But this is 1 month of hourly data for Lithuania. And this is actually March 2019, so the year before the pandemic. Okay, and the idea here is we're going to use this to give us some idea of a benchmark. Okay, so what this data tells us in normal times. Okay, and hopefully you can see this periodic cycle, if you like, in this data. Okay, so most days electricity peaks at roughly the same amount. Okay, apart from some days where the peak is lower. Okay, and hopefully you may have guessed that the higher peaked days are going to be weekdays. Okay, so electricity is consumed in larger quantities in weekdays, and these low points at evenings where there tends to be lower electricity consumption. Okay, And these lower peak days are normally weekdays, but you can see around the 11th of March, there are these 3 lower peak days, okay? And the reason for that, if you are familiar with the Lithuanian calendar, is that 11th of March is a holiday. Okay, so holidays and weekends, electricity consumption is lower. Okay, and this is just to illustrate why looking at data often can help you inform how you analyze the data. Okay, so one way you could take this hourly data and try and produce a useful statistic would be to take a simple average. So arithmetic mean, okay, just average all the data out, but this takes away a lot of the information here. Okay, so this is probably not the best option, and we can do better, right? So one way we can do better is we can take a conditional mean. Okay, by conditional, we mean we're averaging conditional and some other piece of information. Okay, so here there are 2 lines. The green line is the conditional mean, conditional on the day being a work day. Okay, so basically Monday to Friday, excluding the public holiday. Okay, and you can see, and the red line is the same arithmetic mean but applied to holidays. Okay, and you can see that there's already a difference. And if you make a very bold assumption that no work is done on holidays and weekends, we can use this to capture some measure of the electricity used on a normal work day. Okay, so it's 14% higher electricity consumption on a work day. Okay, and now we can use this baseline, and there's a reason why we chose March 2019 rather than, say, January or February, and that's because we would expect a lot of seasonality in the data. Okay, so we would expect electricity consumption maybe to vary over the year. So in colder months, people may use more electric heaters, so there may be higher consumption. Around Christmas, all the shops and houses have Christmas lights and things like that. So we wanted a fair comparison. Okay, so March 2019 versus March 2020. And you can see already that in March 2020, the data is less regular than it was in 2019. Okay, so the peaks are not all roughly the same amount. There's a little bit more variability in the weekday peaks, and it's just from looking at it a bit harder to tell which are the holidays and which are the work days. Okay, compared to the last time. So we can do the same conditional average and conditional mean, and we can see the difference. Okay, so we can again use this gap, and you can see that now electricity consumption was only 10% higher on a workday in March 2020 versus 14% higher in 2019. Okay, so this already suggests some lowering economic activity in March 2020 versus March 2019. But we can also take this a bit further, because we know that the government imposed a quarantine and reduced economic activity, and they did this on a particular day. Okay, so we can take this idea of a conditional mean and condition it on 2 things. Okay, so one, we have, you can see now there's this step fall, right? And the date chosen was the 15th of March, which is the day that the government imposed quarantine. Okay, so now you can see that before the quarantine, before the 15th of March, both averages were higher. Okay, and you can actually see a fall in both averages, okay, following this quarantine period, which suggests some of the economic cost, right, of this quarantine. So now electricity consumption was a lot lower following this quarantine, and you can see if we compared the pre-quarantine average on a non-work day, the post-quarantine electricity consumption on a work day was only 3% higher than this, right? So the red line before 15th of March is only 3% below the green line following 15th of March. Okay, so that suggests the extent to which economic activity has stopped. Okay, and obviously work is done on weekends, right? So shops and restaurants and things also consume electricity, and they work on the weekends as well. And you can see actually that the red line has also fallen post-quarantine. Okay, so that suggests that the kind of ambitious assumption we made earlier was wrong, right? So economic activity has fallen, and it's fallen both on work days and non-work days. Okay, and there are lots of things you can play around with this. You can compare the pre and post quarantines to the 2019 data if you wanted, and you can see actually that if you took some baseline value of electricity, so some baseline consumption as being the weekend days, actually the energy consumption was higher before the quarantine on a weekday in March versus the year before. Okay, and there are reasons for this, such as economic growth, right? We would expect the economy to be growing between March 2019 and March 2020, and there's kind of a lot more scope for analysis here. Okay, so this was just a teaser. Okay, and it's very simple, and it's something that you can try at home, right? And if you're interested, maybe it's something worth doing. Okay, and the general idea here is just by looking at the data a bit more deeply and using some economic ideas and some analytical thinking, this can be important. Okay, so hopefully this is interesting, and hopefully it's given you some ideas of how learning a bit more about economics and application of data can be interesting and useful. Okay, so I think that's all the time I have. So I'll return you to Povilas's capability.
All right, thanks a lot, Ben. Just for everyone to know, this is what I had to do before. I'm trying to run my slides, so that's why I'm a little bit absent-minded. So Ben is teaching macroeconomics at the QE program, and he is part of the Bank of Lithuania. He's a senior economist at the research center there. And actually his research is not really what he presented, but that is sort of really cool to see this versatility. So Ben is doing heterogeneous firm stuff, sort of trying to analyze from theoretical perspective why macroeconomic adjustments are important for macro level or aggregate implications. Something that is certainly super important nowadays, because we really want to learn how, say, firms adjust to what is going on. Ben is trained at Oxford University. He did his undergrad there, and he holds a PhD from UCL. So that's the intro for Ben. Let me then introduce Linas, who will be talking about labor market adjustments. And Linas is based at the university and also at the bank. He did a number of visits abroad when he was pursuing his PhD and postdoctoral studies. So he spent some time in UK at Bristol Uni, but mainly in France. There are many places there. I do remember Paris School of Economics and Toulouse. If I omit something, Linas will correct me. So it's good time to learn something about labor market adjustments. Linas, are you around?
Yes, I'm around. I am around. Thank you very much. Ben, I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your screen so I can share mine. Okay, thank you. Right, so let's... okay, so I should be able to... Okay, can you see the slides? Okay, so yes, so thank you, Povilas, for the introduction. Yes, I am working at the university as a vice dean, and also I'm a senior researcher at the Bank of Lithuania, and I teach at the quantitative economics program. Specifically, I teach economic principles, and starting next year, I will start teaching labor economics course. Okay, so I also took the question of big data literally, and I'm going to talk about the application of big data in labor markets. So this is going to follow very nicely Ben's presentation, and we're going to step up maybe a little bit the analysis. All right, so the question that I'm going to be talking about is job search. How it's the behavior of workers when they're unemployed and they're trying to find a job. Okay, so first of all, introduction, a little bit of introduction. So yes, as Ben has showed in his data, we all know that economic activity over the world has fallen quite significantly. So for instance, the unemployment rate in the US soared from 4 to 15% early May. The situation in Europe is a bit better, but still we see the labor demand, which is falling, and so the number of unemployed individuals rising. So we know a lot about the behavior of the firms. So firms are shutting down, firms are firing workers, but we don't know much about what is the behavior of the workers. How do they adapt to this crisis? And so I'm going to use this data from this new paper by Hensvik Le Barbanchon-Ratelot, my colleagues, by the way, from the times that I've spent in France and in Paris. They have looked into the behavior of the workers, and they used big data. They used real-time data from Swedish Public Employment Service. And the data contains 400,000 clickable job ads that we usually call vacancies. So these are just advertisements about the jobs that are available that the firms post. And then they looked at 90 million clicks of unemployed individuals on these job ads during the months from January to April. Okay, so that's a lot of data. Okay, okay, so this is the shock on labor demand. So this is the average daily inflow of vacancies by week. And I'm sorry, the week are numbered from 1 to 17, but a week, middle of March is about week number 10. This is where you see the shock. So the two lines is 2019 as a benchmark versus 2020 of this year. And you can see that on average, the employment service sees about 2,500 new job ads on their platform. And this is the main and the only sort of platform in Sweden. And you can see that in 2020, there is a big shock. The new posts about jobs are starting to disappear. There is a very clear trend, very clear shock, a downward shock, negative shock of the labor demand. Okay, so this is very well documented. The firms are facing hard times, so they're not hiring. They're not hiring as much as they used to. Now, what's interesting is that not all the jobs are affected equally. So these are 10 occupations, 10 most resilient and 10 least resilient occupations. So the type of occupations that have been affected the most and the type of occupations that have been affected the least. So among the worstly affected occupations, we have waiters and bartenders, dentists, shop staff, cooks, dental nurses. There are jobs, occupations that saw dramatic decreases. On the other hand, some occupations were very resilient. So for instance, authors, journalists, and linguists So the number of vacancies have even increased over this period. Now, other occupations such as specialists in healthcare, nursing professionals, personal care workers. So we see healthcare system workers that are still in need. Then we have all sorts of teachers, university and higher education teachers, primary, preschool teachers. We have slight fall, but not really a big decrease. And so we have these very different effects. So not all occupations are affected in the same way. And yeah, so now the big question is what happens to the clicks? So the unemployed workers who are looking for a job in these hard times, they click on ads and they apply for jobs. So what happened to the clicks? Okay, so this is the picture that is very similar to Ben's picture. This is just total number of clicks on a daily basis. And we can see that it's very seasonal. On weekends, there are fewer clicks. The numbers are very large. So this is 1 times 10 to the power of 6. So this is 1 million. So the website sees on a usual good day, working day, sees over 1 million clicks of ads. And you can see that starting the middle of March, there is a very sharp decline in the total number of clicks. So number of daily clicks falls. This is despite larger number of job searchers because there are more unemployed individuals in this period. The reason is that they're simply not enthusiastic about their prospects, and so they're not searching with the same intensity. Now, the interesting thing, so this is when we look at what happens to the clicks of all occupations versus the occupations that are resilient. Okay, so this is number of clicks per vacancy in all occupations. The blue dots are 2020, the red dots are 2019. So we can compare what happens. So clearly, from the very moment we have a shock, each vacancy is receiving significantly fewer clicks. And this is what's happening overall. So unemployed workers who are looking for a job, they are doing it less actively on average. They are discouraged sort of by the crisis. However, when we look at the resilient occupations, this is the list of occupations that I showed just before, the occupations that the number of vacancies did not fall tremendously. We can see that those occupations have a much higher number of clicks than in 2019. They receive significantly more clicks than in 2019. So this is very interesting because it means that workers adjust the direction of their search. They're not searching randomly. They want to get those jobs that were not affected. They want to become teachers. They want to start working in healthcare. This is a very interesting result, and it shows that workers are dynamic and they react. So this data, and really the data is fantastic, and I look at Sweden with envy, the fact that they have this kind of data. But this is very important. It provides us very important information in understanding the structural changes in the labor market that are happening following COVID-19. Okay, so this is all I have. If you want to learn more about this kind of stuff, you can do it in the labor economics course of the Bachelor in Quantitative Economics. Thank you. We cannot hear you.
Because I'm muted, apparently. Thanks a lot. Awesome presentation. This is not what I want. This is the first set of lectures. This is something. I hope this is the right thing. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Awesome. Let me make it big. Fantastic. So as Ben and Linas have delved into, something that either they research or find super relevant at the current moment, I will also use this one.
I'm sorry, Pavel, for some reason we cannot see the slides.
All right. Let me then come back. Can you see this?
Yes, we can see this.
Okay. You see the screen?
Yes.
Awesome. So maybe my Mac is not really super compatible with Microsoft, but that's also an interesting economics question. Why this could be the case. Okay, so let me just reiterate. I will also base this on research, and this is the joint paper, or some ideas from the joint paper with Aurelia and Alminas, and Aurelia is based at the Bank of Lithuania. Alminas is based at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And why I thought I would go for this paper, and actually just some ideas, because we do have some time, we should have some time for questions, therefore we will not consume all of the rest rest of the time talking about this thing. But think about the world that we live in, and think about the companies that are facing effectively the circumstances because of pandemic, and something that has started largely as a supply shock. By supply we effectively mean in economics. For instance, your supplier cannot deliver something that it could have delivered before. Think of the global economy being interconnected into the global value chains. And for instance, if you have a supplier in China and there is a big thing such as pandemic happening there, then the whole chain can be affected. But with time, the supply shock starts becoming a demand shock too. Why is that? Just literally think about yourself or your families and think of, say, how much certainty do you have about how will the future look like? How comfortable do you feel spending bulk of money on big purchases, such as, durable things? What we call durable in economics is like, those long-lasting purchases, which do require a lot of investments, such as cars, housing, etc. So this is a pretty cool thing, because I will be looking at the entire population of Lithuanian firms. So this beautifully connects to this idea of big data. So what we effectively have all Lithuanian firms, and we observe them annually. And we will exploit what is known in economics as sort of natural experiment type of setting. So think how to answer questions in economics. In economics, everything is interlinked with everything. Therefore, it's very hard to tease out what we call causal effects. What causes what? But we figured out during the period over which we observe Lithuanian firms, some interesting things have happened. And economists actually resort to this idea of replicating experiment without actually conducting it. So what is a natural experiment? A natural experiment is like making individuals fall into the groups of getting some sort of treatment and the control group without actually them, or without actually experimenter him or herself doing that allocation. So this sort of arising naturally. That is why it's a natural experiment. So what we are looking at, we're looking at a very interesting event which happened when after the Russian annexation of Crimea, the European Union has imposed sanctions on certain Russian goods. And what Russia has done, Russia has responded by counter-sanctions. And it happened that the counter-sanctions effectively fell into the area of agricultural and food products. And for you, some of you who may have some feeling of how Lithuanian economy looks like, this is a very important sector. And in fact, much of agricultural products get exported to Russia. So this is then, becoming super interesting because we have some, very naturally arising shock, which we can cleanly identify, because the demand that was before counter-sanctions were effectively announced disappeared almost next day. So this is a very awesome economic question to learn. So if you're a company and you face a demand shock, so demand just disappeared, what will you do? It's very easy to sort of link this to what is going on now. For instance, when the government announces about the quarantine and you no longer have demand just because your business is such that it may raise some risk and therefore you cannot operate, or at least cannot operate for a certain amount of time. What do you do? Right? So what is available to you? And this is a very basic question, but the more basic the question, the harder it is to answer. So, what we see here is indeed how large the shock actually was. So here we observe all of the firms. We have the value added of them. We have the value added in the sample and the overall economy, just sort of having an idea how representative all of this data is. We have the exports. And here you can see that, the banned exports, say, for the food manufacturing, happen to be quite substantial. That is, almost 10% of all exports happen to be the products that were banned. So this is not a nuisance. This is not a small shock for the food sector. For the wholesale sector, it is certainly smaller, but nevertheless even more interesting, because then we may have actually some sort of comparison for different sectors which do differ along many dimensions, including the size of the shock that they face. These figures effectively show you year-on-year change of the banned products. So for instance, in 2014, almost 40% of a decline was registered in terms of the banned product export. And this reached almost 100% in 2015. Right? So this is a real thing. This is not like those sanctions haven't worked. This is actually what comes from what firms are reporting. So this is the real data. As I mentioned, this is a big thing. And here you can see 4 graphs effectively showing you in the upper the food manufacturing and in the below area the wholesale sectors. And these different lines just literally show you the firms that happen to be either highly affected, low affected, and then the entire industry. This red one is effectively the firms that experience this high shock. So those ones that indeed have exported to Russia. And there you can see how sales go down almost to zero in just a matter of 2 years, or even less than 2 years, effectively 1 year. So this is really then a very relevant question. So as a firm, what do you do? Like, what is available to you? And using this brilliant data, which has all of the firms, we raise this question and then we think how to identify that effect. So we build a model, etc. But for this, which is just a teaser, I'll just delve into few results, effectively into 2 results. One is what we observe that after the shock, both food manufacturing firms and wholesale firms, they lay off part-time employees. So it actually seems that we have a nice story to tell why companies go or prefer having different types of employment or people at the very same company. It does seem that the shock is at least partly absorbed by those part-time employees. In other words, so those people get get fired. That helps the companies to somehow absorb this negative, unexpected shock. From the macro perspective, of course, the question is, so what is happening with those part-time employees? When the shock is very, targeted, as in this case, particular products only, those people can be effectively reshuffled or rematched with other employers. What is different now, this shock is so universal that effectively it's not, a targeted one. Therefore, some macro level implications would be different. Just one more result, and then let us jump to opening this up. This is also very interesting to see that how firms adjust apparently depend a lot of how they manage to sort of connect, if you want, or use different inputs. For instance, capital, full-time employment, and part-time employment. When we are looking at the wholesale and foods manufacturers, they're very different companies to start with. Say, food is way more capital intensive. Wholesale is more sort of, labor intensive, if you want. Then they employ different technologies to make use of labor and capital. So this result is also telling us that, in order to know how companies will respond to this negative shock, it is of crucial importance to know how well they are using or sort of effectively, what type of technology they are operating when it comes to producing their output. Are they combining capital so that labor is complementary to that? Therefore, if you increase a little bit capital, your labor would sort of start be more productive. Or, for instance, there is more substitutability, so that actually you can reduce one and increase a little bit the other, and you will still be producing the same or even more of the amount of final production. This apparently is super important for us to learn how companies will adjust. There are many, exciting things in this paper, but this is just a first teaser for you to have an idea how, looking at the real world data, we can learn what companies would do, how to extend that to different contexts and situations. So for instance, what we are observing now, and also how to think without really having an experiment. Nevertheless, think from the experimental setting perspective, because this is effectively how current economic research is conducted. So let me just add final note that if those questions are exciting, if you think why to base your decisions just on some what I call gut feeling, but actually look at the real data, then QE is really an awesome thing, because all people who are teaching there are also researching. So you would get first-hand experience about how to conduct research and how to raise properly, first of all, the right question, and then what type of tools are really necessary or needed to tackle those challenging but super exciting questions. So let me stop here, and let us then come back to the promised second part. And Linas turned his screen on, so go
on. Thank you. So maybe let's start first with the questions that were answered, that were written in the comments before the event. We have 4 questions. They're very specific about the exams, about how to get admitted into the program.
Or Linas, can I do a bit of interruption?
Sure.
Because I see that there are some questions about what has been told. There is one question about the sector level stuff, so let us tackle that. So Kunal is asking, does any particular shock affect both cyclical and non-cyclical sectors in the same way, or there might be some difference according to the sectors the firms are situated? I'm not fully sure what is cyclical or non-cyclical sectors, but let me tackle this from the perspective that we are actually doing this research. So it's actually very cool, cool paper in a sense, and cool shock. I mean, bad shock, but cool from research perspective, because it does affect very different industries. So, one industry, for instance, food industry, is super capital intensive. This is like a traditional manufacturing industry. Just literally think of how you produce like, milk powder, milk products, etc. It's not like, without capital, you can do much. Now, the wholesale sector is effectively the one that is responsible of, think of it, delivering those goods to Russia. So if there is no demand for the goods that you happen to be delivering, then there is no demand effectively for your service. But then the wholesale is substantially more like service sector. And their structure is very different. They're way less capital intensive. They actually employ way more people. Think of that like searching for different markets where to export your goods. And then indeed what we observe, there is a huge difference how those sectors respond. And then, two important things. So one is, how large was your tier of part-time employment? Because if it was very small, you nevertheless have to adjust, with your full-time and capital stuff. Now, capital is a slowly moving thing. You cannot just like straight away say, I'm selling my factory and the next day I'm purchasing it back. Therefore, when it comes to really capital intensive, companies, you just cannot get rid of that. Therefore, you would resort to the full-time employment. Whereas, say, for the service sector, your full-time employment is effectively what ensures the success of your future. Those are the people who might quickly change and find a new market, from Russia to, say, Western Europe. And this is, in fact, what we do observe over time. This very same thing sort of comes to the food sector too, but with a huge time lag. So this is really cool, cool stuff in a sense that's very basic from one perspective. On the other hand, in micro course, we don't really, delve that deeply into why different companies or different industries react differently to the very same, what we call economic shock. Let me stop.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's maybe a good time, an occasion to ask more questions about the three presentations. And then we can move to the program and the specifics about the admission and all other aspects. All right, so no questions. Okay, so I mean, we can leave it open for the chat screen is open. If you change your mind, you can always write the question. So maybe let's do it in this way. I will sort of read the question and then allow you to answer it. Okay, so first question is about the admission interview. What is admission interview, and what kind of preparation does it take to take this admission interview? That's a very simple question.
So Ben and myself come from the system that has applied such things, but I was always on the side of not of interviewee, but interviewer. But Ben actually happened to be on the side of interviewee too at Oxford. So maybe it's a good idea that Ben replies to this.
Okay, well, how do you prepare for unexpected questions? That's the question, right? Yeah, so I guess what I would say is probably there are some things that you can't prepare for, like the logic questions and things like that. And maybe looking up kind of, example logic questions maybe helps you think about things, but we're also interested in motivation, right? So, and these are things that you should have already thought about while making your decision about which courses to apply to. Why do you want to do a certain course? And things like this, right? So those are the aspects that I guess are more easy to prepare for in terms of logic questions or things like that. I would say it's not necessarily about preparation, it's more about how you would approach the questions, right? You want to, the key to these interviews is to realize that what we're after is not the right answer necessarily, but we want to, the idea of the interview is essentially to find people that we think are receptive to teaching, right? So it's more about how you approach a question, how you think about a question, and maybe how you interact with us. And these things are, I guess, more difficult to prepare for. But that's not to say that, so yeah, I would say it's the mindset that you would want to prepare for more than the questions, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Thanks a lot, Ben. So the whole idea of the interview, and that I guess raises many questions for many people who are thinking of maybe applying to this program. Unlike all other programs in the country, we really do care about who you are, so that we don't really base our decision just on the paper. And also we want you to give an opportunity to learn, first-hand experience, whether this could be for you or not. Because the very question that you would get would tell you a lot about the program. So it's not about preparation at all. It's in fact about, the way you reason about the world around you. And the reasoning is not like correct or incorrect. It's either logical or not, So that really matters a lot. I have an idea. I hope we have Justas, our student here. So he has hopefully first-hand experience of going through this. Maybe you could shed some light.
Yeah, sure. If you hear me?
We do.
Yep.
Awesome.
Okay, so Ben basically explained the secrets to a good interview process. It is definitely mostly the mental preparation and trying to keep a cool head throughout it, because I mean, the questions really were split into two parts, which the first one was motivation, and it is crucial attending any economics or non-economics program, just deciding where you actually want to study and where do you see yourself gaining from the program, and what doing things after that, taking some career path. And the second part, the logic questions, yeah, there's not a way to prepare for them, but I could advise to look at the content, for example, of the first year studies, and trying to see if there are some interesting bits and pieces where you can kind of get some advantage learning some simple concepts. Yeah.
Maybe we don't hear you.
My apologies.
That was kind of my answer, yeah.
Awesome, Justas, awesome, but Linas was talking to himself.
Okay, my apologies. I was gonna switch to another question, which is a bit more technical in terms of the requirements of the English language. So the question is, is the national high school exam is enough, or there are some special requirements such as TOEFL or something that you would expect to have should you apply to university in UK, for instance? So I think I can answer it straight. The answer is straightforward. The national English language high school exam is enough to get admitted into this program. There are no additional special requirements for the English language.
Unless, of course, you are a foreign student, and then Vilnius University does have the language requirements, and we follow exactly those. Because it's not only Lithuanian students who are.
Yes.
Yes.
My apologies. That's correct. The problem, yes, it's because the question was about this national exam. But yes, for foreign students, very much that's very much true. So there are.
Linus, this is for comparability reasons only. So we just follow that. Just we can't really know all of the systems globally. Therefore, standardized test is good for sort of having an idea of what the level is to be expected when you get one or the other result.
Okay, and the last is also very technical. It's about the dates of of admission interviews. So again, I can answer. So we have 2 dates now scheduled. It's the 31st of July and the 14th of August. This again applies only for students applying from Lithuania. That is through this national system of applications to higher education institutions. However, if you're applying from abroad, we have a different procedures where we have well, we first send you a test with some questions, and then if that goes well, we have an admission interview, which takes place usually shortly after the test. And this is happening sort of as we go until the end of the admission period for students from abroad. So that's about it. If you have any other, Povilas?
No, I don't have anything to add. I would like to hear some questions or to get.
Okay, so I think so. These were the questions that we had before. Let's see if there are any more questions. I don't see any things. Those were my questions. Appreciate it. Awesome. Okay, so maybe since
there are no questions, we can raise questions. I mean, it's very hard. If that was a class, I would be asking now all of those people who are connected something. But but then since that's not a class, and since I don't know people who are connected, and since also even when I do ask, not many reply. Let's use Justas, who is around here, and let us maybe just very briefly, when people are not confident in asking questions. So what do you find in this program challenging, interesting? Why did you actually pick it? How is it different from others? Because there is some supply. And also, given the world is open, there is global supply in a sense. Even if this year it may be more challenging than in other years to reach those possibly other courses, especially physically, I would guess. So any aspect that is around this would be of very huge interest, I guess, for everyone here from the students' perspective.
Yeah, basically at least a two-part question. So first of all, my motivation for choosing this particular program compared to other economics programs in Lithuania or abroad in general was basically the structure of the program. I felt it really has the core courses in it, the building blocks that I thought I need to understand basically economics and apply it, for example, with some econometrics and data science. So I really liked the structure that it was 3 years, and I knew that I was going to do economics and the aspect of it that I also get some statistical analysis skills, some, programming skills was also something that I've read a lot about, that, you need to have those computer numeracy skills in programming to gain an edge in the job market. So that's what I really that's what basically were the selling points for me for this program, that I figured that I was going to get a solid economic knowledge in it, and I could also apply it with some analysis skills, and basically understand how to think about these problems that were raised today, for example. And the second part, why this program and why not something abroad? Again, I think that I also applied to some abroad programs after my first year in another program here in Lithuania. What I liked was, of course, basically the lectures, because I saw that they do very interesting work in their research, and it seemed that they're very active in the sense that they seek the most interesting questions that there are in economics, and basically they can provide their knowledge, which seemed that is very fresh. And also the study price is one factor for many students, I think, and the fact that you can get a really high quality studies here in Lithuania is really a thing to consider, as well as basically the structure, as I mentioned. So those were probably the key things that pushed me towards pursuing QE. Yeah.
Lovely, thanks. Since we're running out of time, and I feel like we shall more or less stick to what we said regarding the timing. So this is sort of more or less the last chance if you want to quickly scribble your question in the chat part. Let me just add a few words. So it's great pleasure that you joined. I hope you liked what you saw. Why this program has been initiated? It is effectively because of demand. So we're talking a lot about demand, but demand even when it comes to the Bank of Lithuania, which is the partner of this program. And this is where effectively it all started, because more or less like 70% of people who are teaching are active researchers at the Bank of Lithuania. And that makes it very different from all other programs in the country, where people who are teaching are usually lecturers but not researchers. That makes a huge difference, because if you really want to, on the one hand, pursue more research career later on, that will make a difference. On the other hand, if you really want to appreciate how to think like an economist, and also appreciate what processes generate the data that you're analyzing, those are crucial skills. And unfortunately, it's still huge scarcity of both people, those skills. And we even observe in the public how discussions are not really rooted in neither data-driven approaches nor even sometimes logically grounded arguments. So I do hope that at least seeing the value of math, stats, data stuff in order to tackle this whole complexity of the world is a super applicable skill, whatever you want to do. And I saw that Ruta has written a question. So so I'm more or less done with my part, unless Ben or Linas has something to add more from program development or from teaching perspective. Like, how do you see what is different about it, or why we actually need it? It seems like yet another economics program. Lina, we can't hear.
No, I was just going to say, Since we're running out of time, should we take the question or?
Can take the question and respond to this. I guess that would be the same, because Ruta is asking about what is a good student that would be fitting the program, how important are programming skills and math to succeed in QE. So my short answer is you must have an aptitude at least, but the basic math is, however, it is a crucial part. So it's really a must. I mean, let's not deceive ourselves. This is the most selective programming economics in the country. Why is that? We effectively want you to be with people who are thinking like you and who would be pursuing important careers and important things in their lives. And this is one of the biggest things you can get from higher education, generally, wherever you do that, wherever you pursue that. So if anyone can get admitted, then that effectively means you're not really surrounded by the people with whom you would be doing big things and solving big questions. As simple as that. Ruta's question is super good. Yeah, you must like math, but then at the same time, you must be curious about the world, not only about finding a solution to some very abstract thing, which is great, but you must also be curious about things that have very down-to-earth meaning, right? So that is my answer. Any additions? If not,
how can you add? What can you add to that?
Well, I had a couple of things actually.
All right.
More just so for me, the perfect QE student is exactly what Povilas said in terms of logical thinking and interested in the world. In terms of the kind of programming example, which was part of the question, that to me is not necessary, right? Because to me that's a skill rather than a mindset. And you know, the perfect student has the right mindset and the right logical thinking ability, and the skills we add the skills, right?
I may only add that we had also examples of students successfully joining a QE program after doing a bachelor in quite a different fields. Again, it's all about so it's about the mindset, and that's what it takes. So it's. But mathematics and statistics is something that you will see a lot in these programs. So that's something that you have to consider. Yes, that's something for you to consider.
Awesome, guys. Thanks a lot. Thank you for everyone, Linas, Justas, and Ben, for those who joined. So I guess our message is be curious. I guess this is part of revealed preference of being curious about what we'll be talking today. And then be brave enough to try out and learn. And it's fine if you learn that's not for you. Thanks a lot. Have a good day and hope to see you maybe in the admissions interview.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Lovely. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.